All right, welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty unique today, something that you guys specifically requested, actually, the Islamic Hijri calendar. You sent over some great stuff, too, like articles, even some research papers on the astronomy side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Should be fun.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm really interested in the whole idea of a purely lunar calendar.
It is fascinating. It's a very different way to think about time, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
stepping outside of our normal Gregorian calendar
totally.
to see how other cultures, have measured and experienced time throughout history.
Yeah. I mean, for a lot of us, our birthdays are on the same date every year, so this is different.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. What is the Hijri calendar, and what makes it so unique?
Okay, so the Hijri calendar is a lunar calendar, which means it follows the cycles of the moon. And it's used by Muslims all around the world for religious and cultural purposes. It has 12 months, just like the Gregorian calendar, but it has a total of 354 or 355 days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's a bit shorter than the solar year we use in the Gregorian calendar.
Huh.
And what this means is that the Hijri months actually shift by about 10 to 12 days each year relative to the Gregorian calendar.
So a holiday, like a Hijri holiday, it could be in July one year and June the next.
Exactly. Exactly. It kind of moves around.
That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
So how did this calendar even like come to be? What's the origin story?
Well, the origin of the calendar is actually closely tied to a very important event in Islamic history. Back in 622 CE, the Prophet Muhammad, he migrated from Mecca to Medina. And this event is known as the Hijra.
Okay.
And it was so significant, this migration, that it actually became the starting point, like the year one of the Islamic calendar. And that's why it's called the Hijri calendar.
I see.
Each year is marked as AH, which means after Hijra.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So year one on the Hijri calendar, 1 AH, corresponds to 622 CE
That's right.
on the Gregorian calendar. Wow, that's a completely different starting point for marking time.
Yeah.
What about the months themselves?
Yeah.
Do they have like specific names and meanings?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Each month has its own special significance in Islamic tradition. So, for example, Muharram, which is the first month of the Islamic year, it's considered a sacred month.
Okay.
And it includes the day of Ashura, which is a very important day observed by Muslims. And it's a time of both mourning and celebration, depending on the branch of Islam.
Okay.
Then you have Rabi's Alawal, which is the month that marks the birth of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
So very important month.
And of course, Ramadan,
Yes.
the month of fasting.
Of course, of course.
And it seems to be a lot more than just not eating and drinking.
Right?
Like it's a whole, from what I've read, it's a whole time of spiritual reflection and even community.
Yeah. Ramadan is really a time for deep spiritual reflection. And it's a time for strengthening your connection with God and also with the community. People, Muslims, come together for prayers, for breaking their fast together, for charity, for acts of service. So it's a very special month. It is challenging, fasting from dawn till dusk for a whole month.
Yeah, that's intense.
It is. But for many, it's also a really beautiful and moving experience.
So speaking of challenges, like how does this calendar being lunar actually work in practice? I mean,
Yeah.
how do you know when a month begins?
That's where the whole moon sighting thing comes in.
Okay.
Unlike the Gregorian calendar, which is based on, fixed calculations, the start of each month in the Hijri calendar is determined by actually observing the new crescent moon.
Wow. Okay.
Traditionally, communities would rely on people actually seeing the new moon in the sky to mark the beginning of the month.
That's pretty cool. I mean, it's really, you can see how much closer to nature and like the celestial cycles this calendar is.
Right.
But I imagine that they're relying on people seeing it. That can get a little tricky, right?
Yeah, it definitely can lead to some complexities, because weather conditions in different places, geographic location, even just the way people interpret what's considered a visible crescent, all of that can vary.
Right.
And so it's not uncommon for different communities to start the month, like on slightly different days, even within the same country sometimes. And this has actually led to ongoing discussions about maybe standardizing the calendar, maybe using astronomical calculations.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, the traditional method of moon sighting is still a really important part of their practice and their connection to the lunar cycle.
Yeah, it's just it makes you realize there's a really human element to this,
Yeah.
this way of keeping time.
Mm,
It's not just numbers.
absolutely.
It's actual people looking, interpreting. There's probably even debates, right,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
within the community
Okay.
about when the new moon is actually visible. So you mentioned earlier that certain months are considered sacred.
Yes.
Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, so there are 4 months in the Islamic calendar, Muharram, Rajab, Dhul-Qa'dah, and Dhul-Hijjah,
Yeah.
that have this special status as sacred months. And historically, these were months where warfare was prohibited in pre-Islamic Arabia. And this tradition has kind of carried over into Islamic practice. So these months are seen as times for peace, for reflection, for pilgrimage.
So it's almost like a built-in system,
Yeah.
for promoting harmony and de-escalation throughout the year.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how the calendar isn't just about marking time, but it's tied in with cultural and even ethical values.
Absolutely. It's a reflection of a worldview where timekeeping is deeply connected to spiritual practice and social conduct.
Okay, so speaking of practice, how does the Hijri calendar impact everyday life for Muslims?
Yeah.
I mean, beyond just marking religious holidays.
It plays a really, really important role in everyday life because it's used to determine the timing of so many, many key aspects of Islamic practice.
Okay.
Obviously, Ramadan, it dictates the start and end of Ramadan, which affects daily routines, for millions of Muslims.
Yeah, sure.
It determines when the two Eids are celebrated, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, which are, major celebrations.
Yeah.
And it's also crucial for the Hajj pilgrimage,
Okay.
which happens during a specific period in Dhul-Hijjah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just a timekeeping system. It's a guide for spiritual practice, for social gatherings, even for global journeys.
Wow. So it's not just a calendar. It's a guide.
It's very much interwoven into
Yeah.
the fabric of life. And, even beyond specific events, the lunar cycle itself, like just the phases of the moon, actually influences daily rhythms. For some Muslims, for example, some Muslims choose to fast on certain days that are linked to the lunar phases.
Interesting.
So it's like connecting their spiritual practice, directly to the natural world.
Yeah. It's really beautiful how calendars are not just these abstract things.
Yeah.
They really reflect cultural values. They connect us to the cosmos, to nature,
Mm-hmm.
and they really shape how we experience time itself.
Right.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've gone through the origins of the Hijri calendar, the lunar cycles that make it work, the meaning of the different months,
Yeah.
and how it impacts, daily life and major events.
It's a fascinating look into how differently how other cultures have approached time. And I think it raises an interesting question for us all, like how might understanding different cultural calendars, how might that deepen our appreciation for the many diverse ways that we as humans experience time and even faith?
That's a great question to think about.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this deep dive has given you guys a new perspective on time, on tradition.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in learning more, we'll be sure to put some resources in the description.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.